It was a cold autumn afternoon in Illinois. The wind whistled through the trees, scattering dry leaves across the ground. Inside a quiet veterinary shelter, Bentley, an 11-year-old German shepherd, lay motionless on a blue blanket, his breathing shallow and labored. Bentley wasn't just any dog. He had been a hero, a loyal K-9 officer who served alongside Officer Jake Turner for nearly a decade. But now, his weary body signaled that his time was running out. Dr. Evans, the veterinarian, stepped into the room and gently stroked Bentley's head, trying to offer some comfort. The shelter staff stood silently, watching with somber faces. Bentley had been quiet for days, but there was still a spark of anticipation in his eyes, as though he were waiting for someone. Then, without warning, a deep, mournful howl echoed through the shelter. Everyone froze. The sound was filled with pain and longing. Bentley was calling out. He was calling for Jake. Across town, Jake sat in his living room, staring blankly at the floor. He hadn't been able to shake off the phone call from that morning. "Jake, Bentley's not doing well. You should come see him," Dr. Evans had said. Those words weighed heavily on Jake's mind. He wasn't ready to say goodbye. Bentley wasn't just his work partner. He was family. Jake had tried to push the thought aside, but when the second call came, saying Bentley had called out for him, he knew he couldn't wait any longer. The drive to the shelter felt endless. Memories of their time together flashed in his mind. The first time he met Bentley, the cases they solved, and the countless nights Bentley had been his protector and companion. Every mile stretched out painfully, as if time itself was conspiring to delay him. Jake gripped the steering wheel and whispered under his breath, "I have to make it in time." When Jake finally arrived, he hurried through the corridors until he reached the room where Bentley lay. The dog, barely able to move, slowly raised his head. For a moment, his tired eyes lit up with recognition. Jake knelt beside him, gently placing a hand on Bentley's chest. "I'm here now, buddy. You're not alone," he whispered, his voice breaking. Bentley let out a faint whimper but, to Jake's surprise, began to push himself up. His body trembled under the effort. "Whoa, easy, Bentley. You don't have to do this. Just rest," Jake urged, trying to stop him. But Bentley was as stubborn as ever. He wasn't ready to give up. With what little strength he had left, he leaned into Jake and let out another long, haunting howl. The sound echoed through the room, sending a chill down Jake's spine. It was more than just a howl. It felt like a message, something deep and powerful that none of them could ignore. If you're touched by this story, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss more incredible stories like this one. The air inside the shelter seemed to grow still after Bentley's second howl. Jake sat silently beside his partner, his hand resting gently on the dog's side. His mind swirled with questions. Why had Bentley used what little strength he had left to howl like that? It wasn't just pain, it was more than that. Jake could feel it deep in his chest. Bentley wasn't giving up. He was holding on for something. Jake leaned closer, whispering softly, "I'm here, buddy. Whatever you need, I'm right here." Bentley let out a faint sigh, his breathing unsteady. Jake couldn't help but reflect on all the times Bentley had shown an unbreakable will to protect. Together, they had faced life-or-death situations that most people wouldn't believe. He remembered when Bentley stopped an armed suspect from attacking him during a routine traffic stop. That moment replayed vividly in his mind. It was always Bentley who put himself in harm's way without hesitation. But now, there was nothing Jake could do to return the favor, and the helplessness gnawed at him. Dr. Evans peeked in through the door's window but didn't interrupt. He understood the significance of this bond. Jake had barely spoken to anyone since arriving, his focus solely on Bentley. No words were necessary. The entire staff could feel the intensity of the connection between the two. Bentley had served with Jake through cold nights and tense confrontations, and now he was holding on with every ounce of strength he had left. As Jake sat in silence, lost in thought, Bentley stirred. His ears twitched slightly, and his eyes sharpened with a sudden alertness. He seemed to hear something, though the room was deathly quiet. Jake noticed the change immediately. Bentley's body, weak and trembling just moments before, showed a faint surge of determination. His gaze locked on the door, as though expecting someone to enter. Jake followed his eyes but saw nothing. "What is it, boy? You hear something?" he asked, gently stroking Bentley's fur. Bentley didn't break his stare at the door. His breaths came slower but deeper now, as if he was gathering himself for one final act. Jake's gut tightened. He knew Bentley wasn't simply holding on to survive. He was waiting for something or someone. But who or what? Jake didn't know yet, but he was sure the answer would come soon. The tension in the room was palpable. Bentley's gaze remained fixed on the door, his ears straining for a sound that only he seemed to hear. Jake glanced toward the door again, then back at Bentley, a knot tightening in his chest. He had seen Bentley act like this before, always alert to dangers or signals no one else noticed. But this time was different. Bentley wasn't on duty, and there was no immediate threat. Yet, the dog's unwavering focus sent a chill through Jake. "Is someone coming?" Jake muttered to himself, rubbing the back of his neck nervously. He shook his head. He wasn't one to believe in signs or supernatural things, but Bentley had instincts Jake had learned never to question. "It's okay, boy. I'm here," he whispered again, trying to reassure them both. Bentley's breathing steadied for a moment, though his body remained tense. Memories of similar moments filled Jake's mind. Bentley standing between him and danger, refusing to move even when wounded. Like that time during a hostage situation when Bentley, despite being injured, refused to leave his side until the threat was neutralized. It was the same defiant strength that Jake now saw in his partner's eyes. Bentley wasn't ready to let go yet. Outside the room, Dr. Evans conferred quietly with a staff member. They spoke in hushed tones about Bentley's condition, their expressions somber. "It's like he's holding on for something," Dr. Evans murmured. "I've seen dogs do this before. When they're waiting for a loved one to say goodbye." The staff member nodded but hesitated. "He already has Jake here. Who else could he be waiting for?" Back in the room, Jake sat beside Bentley, trying to push away the growing unease gnawing at his mind. He kept stroking the dog's fur, searching for words that didn't come. Jake had always been a man of action, not sentiment, but moments like this stripped away all defenses. His voice trembled as he finally spoke again. "You've always known more than the rest of us, haven't you? Always one step ahead." He chuckled bitterly, wiping at his eyes. "Maybe you see something I can't." At that moment, Bentley shifted his weight slightly, resting his head against Jake's knee. His body was weak, but there was still something purposeful in his actions. Jake swallowed hard, feeling Bentley's warmth pressing against him. Time seemed to slow, each second stretching endlessly. Whatever Bentley was waiting for, Jake knew they didn't have much time left to figure it out. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, but for Jake, time felt warped. Each second dragged on, heavy with uncertainty. Bentley's gaze hadn't shifted from the door, his ears occasionally twitching at sounds Jake couldn't hear. There was something about Bentley's intensity that unsettled him. Jake knew the dog too well. Bentley wasn't prone to distractions. If his focus was this strong, it meant something important was happening. Jake leaned forward slightly, his voice low. "What's going on, Bentley? What are you waiting for?" Bentley gave no response beyond a slow blink, his breathing shallow but steady. The room felt suffocatingly quiet. Jake ran his hand down the dog's back, the warmth under his palm a painful reminder of how fragile Bentley had become. Memories of the countless nights they spent together on patrol flooded his mind. Bentley had always been the calm presence when things went south, the one who could sense danger before anyone else. But now Jake felt powerless. There was no suspect to chase, no danger to neutralize. All he could do was wait. Dr. Evans entered quietly, his expression a mix of concern and curiosity. He approached Jake, keeping his voice soft. "How's he holding up?" Jake glanced down at Bentley, who shifted his head slightly but remained locked onto the door. "I'm not sure. It's like he knows something's going to happen. He's been staring at the door for a while now, The vet nodded thoughtfully and knelt beside Bentley to check his vitals. Despite the dog's physical state, there was still an unmistakable alertness in his eyes. Sometimes, Dr. Evans began, dogs hold on for reasons we don't fully understand. I've seen it before. When they're waiting for closure or for someone important to arrive, Jake clenched his jaw, the words hitting harder than he expected. Closure. That word made his stomach twist. Was that what this was about? Was Bentley holding on just long enough to say goodbye? The idea was unbearable. Bentley wasn't just a partner. He was the one constant in Jake's life through every hardship. When Jake's marriage had crumbled, it was Bentley who stayed by his side, offering silent comfort when no one else could. "You're not leaving me yet," Jake murmured, his voice rough with emotion. Bentley's ears twitched again, and this time he lifted his head with more effort. His body tensed as if he were listening for something. Jake straightened instinctively. The room was silent, but Bentley was reacting to something only he could hear. A moment later, Jake caught it too. Faint footsteps echoing down the corridor. Slow and steady, they grew louder, each step causing Bentley's body to tighten with anticipation. Jake turned his gaze toward the door. "Is that it? Is that what you've been waiting for?" he asked quietly. The footsteps stopped just outside. Jake felt a strange, almost electric tension in the air as the door handle began to turn. The door creaked open slowly, and a shadowed figure stepped into the room. Jake's breath caught in his throat, and Bentley, with what little strength he had left, pushed himself to sit upright for the first time in hours. Whoever was at the door had finally arrived. The door opened slowly, the dim hallway light casting a long shadow across the floor. Jake's eyes narrowed, his heart racing as he tried to make out the figure stepping inside. Bentley let out a low, strained whimper, one filled with recognition. For a moment, the world seemed frozen. Then, a familiar voice broke the silence. "Hey there, Bentley. It's been a long time, hasn't it?" Jake's breath caught in his throat. Standing in the doorway was Emily Turner, his younger sister. She hadn't visited in years, their relationship strained after a falling out following their father's funeral. Jake hadn't expected to see her here. Not now, not in this moment. Emily's gaze softened as she took a hesitant step forward. Her eyes fell on Bentley, her expression shifting from surprise to deep sorrow. She knelt beside the dog, gently stroking his fur. "You remember me? Don't you, boy?" she whispered. Bentley's ears twitched in response, his eyes brighter than they had been all day. Jake stood speechless, trying to process what was happening. "Emily, I didn't know you were coming," he finally said, his voice heavy with both confusion and emotion. Emily glanced up at him, her face shadowed with guilt. "Dr. Evans called me," she admitted quietly. "He said Bentley wasn't doing well. I knew I had to come. I didn't want to make things worse between us, Jake. But I couldn't let him go without saying goodbye." Jake's jaw tightened, his emotions a chaotic storm inside him. It had been years since they'd spoken like this. So much resentment had built up between them, old wounds that neither of them had ever tried to heal. But seeing her now, kneeling beside Bentley with tears in her eyes, cracked something in him. Maybe Bentley had known all along that this moment needed to happen. For a few moments, no one spoke. The only sound was Bentley's labored breathing, though it seemed steadier now, as if the presence of both Jake and Emily had given him some measure of peace. Jake slowly exhaled and crouched beside them. "He never forgot you," Jake said softly, watching the way Bentley leaned into Emily's touch. "Even after all these years, he still remembers everything. Just like I do." Emily's eyes met his, filled with unspoken regret. "I never stopped thinking about you, or him," she replied, her voice trembling. "I was just scared to come back after everything that happened. I thought you didn't want to see me." Jake shook his head slowly. "We've both made mistakes, but maybe it's time we stop running from them." Bentley let out a soft sigh, his body relaxing for the first time in hours. The tension in the room lifted slightly, though the weight of what lay ahead was still present. Jake knew they didn't have much time left, but for now, Bentley was surrounded by the people who had meant the most to him. It was the closure Bentley had been waiting for. And maybe Jake thought it was what they had needed too. Wow, what an emotional moment. What are your thoughts on this heartfelt reunion? Let me know in the comments below. The room fell into a gentle stillness. Bentley lay between Jake and Emily, his breathing steadier than before, though it was still shallow. His eyes shifted between the two siblings as if he could sense the unspoken weight between them. For years, there had been a chasm separating Jake and Emily, filled with misunderstandings and unhealed wounds. Yet now, with Bentley as the bridge between them, the silence felt less like a barrier and more like a space for reflection. Emily kept her hand on Bentley's fur, her fingers gently stroking the patches of gray that had spread over the years. She hadn't seen him since he was in his prime. Strong, vigilant, a protector. Seeing him like this now, fragile but still full of love and loyalty, brought tears to her eyes. "He's always been a fighter," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake nodded, a sad smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Yeah, and stubborn too. He never backed down from anything." For a moment, they both chuckled softly, a rare shared memory bridging the gap between them. The tension that had built over years began to ease, if only slightly. Jake leaned back against the wall, crossing his arms. His gaze softened as he watched Emily. He hadn't expected her presence to bring comfort, but somehow it did. "You should have come back sooner," he finally said, his voice gentle but firm. "I wasn't angry with you. I was just hurt that you left when we needed you most." Emily sighed deeply, guilt etched into her features. "I know. I didn't know how to handle it after Dad died. I thought maybe it'd be easier for both of us if I stayed away. But I was wrong." The vulnerability in her voice made Jake pause. For the first time, he saw the fear that had driven her away. Not indifference, but a fear of facing the grief they both shared. He nodded slowly, acknowledging her words. "We can't change the past, Emily," he said quietly. "But maybe we can fix what's left." Her eyes shimmered with tears as she gave a small, hopeful smile. It wasn't a complete resolution, but it was a start. Bentley shifted again, letting out a low, contented sigh. His presence between them seemed symbolic, a silent force pulling them back together. Emily noticed how his breathing seemed calmer than before, almost as though he could sense the peace returning between the two people he loved most. "He's been waiting for this, hasn't he?" Emily asked softly. Jake swallowed hard, his throat tightening with emotion. "Yeah, I think he knew this had to happen. Maybe this was his way of bringing us back together." The siblings remained close to Bentley, each lost in thought but now bound by a renewed sense of connection. They still had time to share with him, however brief, and that time felt sacred. For the first time in years, neither Jake nor Emily felt truly alone. The soft hum of the shelter's ventilation system was the only sound as Jake and Emily stayed by Bentley's side. The stillness wasn't oppressive anymore. It was calm, almost comforting. Bentley's eyes slowly drifted shut, though his breathing remained steady. Jake felt a wave of peace settle over him. He knew their time was limited, but Bentley was no longer in pain, at least for the moment. Emily broke the silence, her voice gentle. "Do you remember that time Bentley scared off those neighborhood kids when they were trying to sneak into the backyard?" she asked with a faint smile. Jake chuckled, the memory coming back to him. "Yeah. They ran like hell after he barked at them. He didn't even have to chase them. Just stood there, all serious, like he was on duty." Emily laughed softly. "He always took things seriously, didn't he? Even when we weren't in danger." They shared a moment of quiet laughter, something that felt long overdue. Jake hadn't realized how much he missed these conversations until now. Talking about Bentley's past exploits was like revisiting the best parts of their childhood. Emily used to visit often back then, back when the family felt whole. But after their father's death, everything had unraveled. Their memories had become shadows, lingering but painful to confront. Now, Bentley seemed to be guiding them back to those lighter moments, urging them to find healing in the past. Jake leaned forward and rested his hand on Bentley's head. The dog stirred slightly under his touch, as if acknowledging the warmth and comfort surrounding him. You've always been the glue holding things together, haven't you, boy? Jake whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Even now, Emily glanced at Jake, her expression softening. You really needed him, didn't you? Jake exhaled slowly and nodded. Yeah, more than I realized. He got me through some rough times. When Dad died, when the divorce happened, Bentley was the only one who never left. Emily bit her lip, tears forming in her eyes. She hadn't known how much Jake had been hurting all those years. She reached over and placed a hand on his shoulder. I'm sorry I wasn't here for you. I should have been. Jake shook his head gently. We were both hurting, but maybe we can finally stop carrying that alone. Bentley stirred again, his ears twitching slightly at their voices. It was as if he could feel the weight lifting between them. His breathing grew calmer, deeper, though a subtle fatigue remained in every movement. Jake and Emily exchanged a glance, both realizing how much Bentley had been waiting for this moment. To see them reconcile and stand together once more. The three of them remained in that peaceful stillness, time slowing as they cherished these moments. Jake knew the inevitable was near, but for now it didn't matter. What mattered was that Bentley wasn't alone, and neither were they. Bentley lay quietly between Jake and Emily, his body no longer tense. His breathing was soft, almost rhythmic, as if he had found a sense of peace. Jake gently scratched behind Bentley's ears, something that had always calmed him after long shifts on patrol. Bentley's tail gave the faintest of movements, barely a wag, but enough to remind Jake that his partner was still aware. Emily wiped a tear from the corner of her eye and sat cross-legged beside Bentley. You remember when Dad said Bentley was more responsible than either of us? She said with a sad smile. Jake smirked. Yeah, because he never forgot anything. Always alert, always on schedule. Better than us, for sure. They both chuckled softly. It was strange how, even in this moment, laughter could slip through the cracks in their grief. Bentley had been more than a working dog. He had been the heart of their family for years. As the memories flowed, Jake's thoughts returned to the countless nights he had spent in Bentley's company. Through every trial, Bentley had remained his rock. There had been moments during dangerous cases when Jake wasn't sure if he'd make it home alive. But Bentley was always there, fearless, dependable. Now, however, it was Jake's turn to offer that same unwavering presence. You've done enough, boy, Jake whispered, stroking Bentley's side. You don't have to fight anymore. Emily's eyes met Jake's, understanding the weight of those words. Do you think he knows it's okay to rest? She asked softly. Jake sighed and nodded slowly. Yeah, I think he's just waiting to be sure we'll be okay. He's always been like that. Putting us first. Emily bit her lip, fighting back tears. She reached down and placed both hands gently on Bentley's paws, as if to hold him in place for just a little longer. The room grew quiet again, the siblings lost in their thoughts. Outside, the sun began to set, casting long beams of amber light through the window. The fading warmth touched Bentley's coat, giving him an almost ethereal glow. Jake felt a deep ache in his chest, knowing this might be one of the last sunsets Bentley would see. He squeezed his eyes shut for a moment, letting the pain wash over him before he spoke again. We're here, Bentley. We're not going anywhere, he said softly. Bentley's eyes opened briefly, meeting Jake's gaze. There was no fear, only a calm understanding. He shifted slightly, pressing his head into Jake's hand one last time. His breaths became slower, more measured. Jake and Emily stayed close, their hands on him, refusing to let go. Whatever came next, Bentley wouldn't face it alone. The sun's last rays filtered through the window, casting a warm, golden light across the room. Bentley remained still, his breathing now slow and shallow. Jake could feel each rise and fall of his chest beneath his hand, each breath coming with more effort than the last. Despite the impending loss, there was a calmness in Bentley's eyes, a quiet acceptance. Jake's heart ached, but he knew that this moment wasn't about his pain anymore. It was about giving Bentley peace. Emily sniffled quietly, wiping her cheeks with the sleeve of her jacket. You've been so strong, Bentley, she whispered. You've done more than anyone could have asked. It's okay now. You can rest. Jake glanced at his sister, their eyes meeting in silent understanding. Emily's words echoed the same ones Jake had been struggling to say. Bentley had carried the weight of so much for them, always there to protect, to comfort, to guide. Now it was their turn to let him go. The moments stretched on, their quiet presence the only comfort Bentley needed. Jake leaned forward and placed a kiss gently on Bentley's forehead, feeling the warmth of his fur. His throat tightened, but he forced himself to speak, his voice low and steady. "I couldn't have asked for a better partner or a better friend," he said, his voice cracking. "You saved my life more times than I can count. I don't know how I'm going to do this without you, but I'll never forget you, buddy. Never." Bentley stirred slightly, pressing his head closer into Jake's hand. His tail gave one last, faint wag, barely noticeable but unmistakable. Jake and Emily both froze for a moment, taking it in. It was as if Bentley was reassuring them, telling them that everything was going to be okay. Emily sobbed quietly beside him, her hand still resting on Bentley's paws. "He's saying goodbye," she whispered. Jake swallowed the lump in his throat and nodded. "Yeah, I think he's ready now." The light from the window dimmed further as the sun dipped below the horizon. Bentley's breathing slowed to a near stop, each breath fainter than the last. Jake and Emily sat in quiet reverence, holding on to their companion as he gently slipped away. The room was filled with a deep, peaceful stillness, the kind that only comes when someone's journey has reached its final rest. The room was silent now, except for the faint rustling of the wind outside. Jake sat motionless beside Bentley, his hand resting gently on the dog's still body. The warmth that had once radiated from his loyal companion was fading, but the weight of Bentley's presence lingered in the air, almost tangible. Jake closed his eyes, feeling a deep ache swell in his chest. This wasn't just the end of Bentley's life. It was the closing of a chapter that had defined his own. Emily remained beside him, her hand still wrapped around Bentley's paw. Tears silently streamed down her face, but her expression had softened, as if she too had found a strange peace in the moment. After several long minutes, she finally spoke, her voice hushed but steady. "He waited for this. For us to be here together." Jake nodded slowly, wiping at his own eyes. "Yeah, he always knew what we needed, even when we didn't." He stared at Bentley's face for a long moment, memorizing every detail, the soft graying fur around his muzzle, the gentle slope of his ears. It was hard to believe that the dog who had once charged into danger without hesitation was now gone. But even in death, Bentley had given him one final gift, a bridge back to his sister and the healing of wounds long left open. Dr. Evans entered the room quietly, his footsteps barely audible. He paused in the doorway, observing the scene with a solemn expression. I'm really sorry," he said softly. "Bentley was one of the best I've ever seen. You gave him a good life." Jake exhaled slowly and gave a slight nod. "No. He gave me a good life," he replied, his voice firm despite the emotion behind it. "I wouldn't be here without him." Emily stood and placed a hand on Jake's shoulder. "We should take him home. He deserves to be where he belongs." Jake agreed silently. Together, they made arrangements with Dr. Evans for Bentley's body to be brought back to Jake's property. It was where Bentley had spent his final years after retiring, running through the fields, barking at deer in the distance, and resting peacefully under the old oak tree near the back fence. That would be his final resting place. As they left the shelter, the night sky stretched wide above them, stars glittering in the darkness. Jake felt a strange sense of lightness in his chest despite the loss. Bentley was gone, but his legacy remained. He wasn't just a memory, he was a part of Jake, of both of them. And as they walked toward Jake's truck, Jake glanced at Emily and gave her a small, tentative smile. "We'll be okay," he said softly. Emily nodded, squeezing his arm gently. "Yeah, we will." Together, they drove into the quiet night, carrying Bentley's spirit with them. The pain of loss would remain, but so would the love, and that, Jake knew, would carry them forward. And that's the end of our heartfelt story. If you enjoyed it, Leave a like and subscribe for more stories like this. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a video. Want to support us even more? Send a super chat or super stickers. Your support means the world. Thanks, and see you soon.